Welcome, this is the 10th webcast of the PBC Morning Dawn Study Group from Padmasambhiling Monastery in New York. And here we'll be discussing Chapter 10 of the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche's book, The Buddhist Path. So thanks so much for joining us. We'll begin with opening prayers and then we'll go into our discussion. Thanks so much.
Yatsen chuni nurudni, pedma chuni jisura, kordu kanro mambu korul, chichi jisu danduji, jinji lokchi shiksu so, guru pedma siddhi om. Samantabhadra, Vajrasattva, Pramadavajra, Sri Singha, Dhammakara, the 25 king and subjects, So, Zor, Nun, Yang, and the 100 Tirtans and others, the Lamas of the Kama and Charma lineages, to you I pray. The supreme tradition of the glorious Buddha Padmasambhava, which is the essential, extraordinary view and doctrine of the early translation school, you keep alive and spread by the light of wisdom. Lord of Dharma, great Khenpo, I pray at your lotus feet. In the palace of the Ogman Dharmadhatu, the essence of all the Buddhas of the three times, the one who shows clearly the Dharmakaya of my own mind, we pray to the Honorable Root Guru, glorious Root Teacher, precious one, dwelling on the lotus seat on the crown of my head. Hold me with your great kindness, and bestow the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind. Om Maravasanadi, Om Maravasanadi, Om Maravasanadi, Om Maravasanadi, Om Maravasanadi.
Thanks again. So we'll begin this chapter 10 of the Buddhist Path. I think it's on page 49. And then I'll quickly just give a little overview leading up to this first topic point that we'll discuss. So in the first paragraph, Rinpoches say that according to Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism, there are three principal aspects of the body, and these are channels, wind, and essence elements. And in Tibetan that's Sa, Long, and Tigle. And among these three, the channels are the most important because if we balance the channels, then the wind and the essence elements will become balanced as well. And then the channels, or the nervous system, or meridians, are the root of the body. And after conception, a baby's conception, the first thing that is formed are the channels. First at the navel center, and then the channels to the two eyes are formed. In the third paragraph, that according to the inner tantras, the human body has three main channels: the central channel, and the right channel, and the left channel. And then fourth paragraph, the four chakras or wheels of the channels are joined to these three main channels. And they are located in the four places of our body in our crown area, and then throat, heart, and then navel. So these are our four main chakras of human beings. And then the three channels and four chakras are the basic ground of the body. There are many other minor channels and chakras, and these form differently in different people, and this is why different people have different experiences. The formations of their chakras or their channels mainly are different. And so different beings and different types of beings see things in a variety of ways because of this structure of the channels and chakras are different, and that what we experience outwardly very much depends on the inner structures of our body, which affects our mind. And if we know more about our body and mind, then we won't be as confused when we experience various external events. So that's more or less the first half of the chapter. And then, Lodra, if you'd read that first topic point.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
According to the tantric Buddhist system, of all the aspects of the body, its bones, muscles, blood, and so on, the three principal aspects are the channels, the wings, and the essence element. The channels are the most important because they carry the wind, which moves the essence element throughout the body. When the channels are perfectly balanced, then the wind energy and the essence element are also balanced. The 3 channels and the 4 chakras are the basic ground of the body. They are the source and the main condition for all of one's experiences and sense consciousness. In all human beings, the 3 major channels and the 4 chakras are basically structured in the same way. However, the minor channels are formed differently in different people. Because of differences in the minor channels, people have different personalities, different ways of talking and acting, and different experiences. Page 49, first paragraph, and page 51, the second paragraph. Thank you.
Well, I had just a brief question before we move into the details, but so now all of a sudden we have channels and the winds and the essence elements. So have we seen this before anywhere else in the other yanas, like the Hinayana or the Mahayana teachings up to this point? Because I think this is chapter 10, right?
Yeah.
So now we're just rushing on the scene with the Vajra body. So where do these appear in the other teachings?
In the other teachings in this book, or the other?
Yeah, in this
the
book or in the other yanas.
I mean, depending on the frame of view you're taking, particularly what it seems like this chapter is adding is that, here's some physical components to take with you. So, like, particularly the way Rinpoche was stressing in here, when you bring a straightness and a balance to the body, that's gonna help not only straighten the channels, but then the wings and the essence. All of that balances, and it seems like even that itself goes off the earlier chapters of like taming the mind and the causes and conditions of the mind. And it seems like even though I don't think the channels were referenced before, but it seems like a different view on that same core. All of these practices, are going to taming the mind, and I think this is now more of a physical element to take with it.
And so I would go off of what you're saying, Lodro, and to say that I think definitely Rinpoches have talked previously in this book about body, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So body, speech, and mind, we all have that. And so they've definitely talked about taming the body. Mm-hmm. And here I think they're introducing a more subtle level of body. And this is specific definitely to Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism. Specifically, I think the inner Tantra teachings of the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche. And so I think there's a subdivision between the more common apparent way that we experience form or body. And then there's a more subtle energy or more subtle type of form. And then both outwardly and then also specifically this chapter is dealing with the more subtle structures of our bodies. And so in a Vajrayana context, that's talking about a body is a relative thing. So in terms of relative and absolute truth, it's talking about the part of relative truth of the body. And then specifically in the Vajrayana context, it's talking about how that relative truth is experienced more as in a balanced or pure way, or an enlightened way, the way enlightened beings experience that. So it could be called the pure relative truth, or the pure way in which this more subtle level energy or structure of the body is experienced by enlightened beings, whether we see it or not. These great masters are saying this is the structure of our body, and if we look at it closely, then we can experience that for ourselves too.
And maybe similar the way this we can, as this relates to the whole body of the Buddhist teachings too. Both the points touch on it, so I think we'll touch on it in both of the 2 main points here. But even like with interdependent origination, which is like from the very beginning of the Buddhist teachings, how just all of those, because really the channels and the winds, there are the karmic effects, and then there's, so it's again on this deeper level, looking at our experience and in using that as in the process of taming the mind and revealing our Buddha nature and everything. But so, like that, I think that the 12 links is one way from the beginning. Of course, it may not specifically, the Buddha maybe didn't talk specifically about the winds and channels, and particularly then, but if we look from the viewpoint of them, we can see how that is within the 12 links. Like it just becomes more and more profound or inclusive. From there, maybe.
Thank you.
What do you think?
So,
In terms of where it's located or why? So we're on chapter 10. It just almost, do you think it kind of pops out of the blue in the book? Or I mean, it's definitely a very specific topic.
In the book it does, but I don't know if the book is from a series of lectures or one continuous teaching or compilation. But just like what you guys said too, it's a full spectrum thing. Whenever you practice, you're not disembodied. You're rooted. It's rooted in the body, and I think it's really nice here how they're just highlighting how our inner experience of practice of the Dharma on the mental level is so intimately related with even our physical experience on the subtle levels and the gross levels. So that's pretty cool too.
And so far, in a way, maybe even this chapter on, I mean, they're all talking about ways we can apply, but it seems like the first few chapters are giving kind of the view and a lot of the really essential qualities that are good to connect with, that are related to the nature, and then maybe, like now we're starting to see more, looking at how the channels and winds, because this is a Vajrayana book from the Inner Tantras, which of course include all the 9 yamas, but then maybe the chapters after here are talking specific techniques and things we're looking at in Tibetan Buddhist tantric practice. So maybe that's it, kind of making that move closer to actual practices and things directly in our experience.
There's this chapter, like the second chapter, the causes and conditions of the mind. I was just kind of looking back at that. But that's almost like it could be like an introduction to this chapter.
Right.
If people are kind of wanting to get a basic groundwork to maybe reread that second chapter, because it does talk about like how our consciousness connects with the elements from our parents, and then just basically a little bit about the body. But of course, then this chapter gets more into the subtle details of that. But
I think too, just a really quick important point though, is that since we are moving like into the Vajrayana and the techniques of the Vajrayana and how to see the Vajra body, it seems like Rinpoche has really emphasized that like at this point, like we're not doing this as a means to like gain some special, we're not necessarily, it's not a yoga in the strict sense of, maybe that's the wrong word, but it's not an exercise. We're actually getting into ways to work with the body on this deep level that's like rooted in our bodhicitta motivation and in our pure perception of the Vajrayana, and it seems like Rinpoche emphasizes over and over again in their Shedrana Ana Yoga, how the basis of all this is within the context of refuge, bodhicitta. Like when you practice on these things and with these techniques, which they don't go into so much detail in this chapter, but that's our foundation. That's always our foundation. And if that's not our foundation, then it's not Buddhism and it's not a liberative technique from that perspective. And you asked that question during the Shedrana Yoga too, I think. What's the difference between exercise as just a yogic discipline and a liberative? What makes it lead to enlightenment? Working with the channels, winds, and essence elements. Anyway, thank you all. I think that puts a nice context.
And I think there was, just to go right off that, if it's alright, sorry. That specifically Rinpoches have definitely mentioned that practices that relate to this more inner subtle structures, like that relate to the channels and that relate to the winds, that these existed before Buddha Shakyamuni came. In India, they had been very well established. In addition, like mantra recitation, like these more subtle level practices that are also incorporated in Buddha's teachings of the Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism, that like Trulkor, these exercises with channels, or Salung, the exercises with winds, that those existed prior to the Buddha coming and teaching a complete path to enlightenment. And so specifically regarding your point, that it is what made those practices, or what made us being able to use these subtle structures actually a vehicle for enlightenment, that we could manifest our own Buddha nature and help others do that too. And it's just those points you said, this renunciation, and then based on that, then a bodhicitta, like refuge and bodhicitta, and then also like that Buddha teaching, that emptiness nature, which we've talked about many times in these other chapters of the shamatha vipassana, or looking directly at the nature of the mind, not just its own kind of dualistic, karmic, grasping tendencies. But it's really good as this topic's introduced, because it's so subtle, and for a lot of us it's subtle that we can only read about it, like we're not really directly experiencing it much, or we haven't done many practices with it, so we don't really know personally in our experience. But it's just to say that specifically, like, these techniques are in other traditions, but what makes them part of the Buddhist tradition and how Buddha specifically taught about them is that there's a bodhicitta motivation, some degree of recognition of emptiness, and based on those two principal foundations, then we're also being in touch with these subtle structures that are actually, that the Buddha says are actually there in our body right here and now. And so I thought to just go kind of elaborate a little more on that point you said, which is, it's important to see. Sorry,
Oh no, kind of going off of what was being said. When I was reading through this, I think they're going into it a little bit more in the next chapter, because I peeked and went ahead a little bit, where they're talking about posture and the breath purification. But I also, some of the ways they're talking in here, like for people who are reading this chapter and maybe a little bit newer, like maybe what are some of the more practical takeaways from this? Because they're specifically talking about being conscious of the winds, being conscious of the body, and holding the body, straight. So I don't know, maybe what were some of the more or practical things that people could take away from this now, and how they reflect more physically on the practice? So maybe not going into the deep Ana Yoga teachings, but just some.
I think maybe this, it struck me, it's kind of, in one way it's simple and straightforward, so maybe that's why it could be practical, is on this page 52, the middle middle paragraph there, talking about the breath specifically.
Right.
Talking about how the breath or wind energy is an important element of the body because it communicates between the outside and the inside of the body.
Yeah.
And our whole body, as well as consciousness, relies upon the breath. To me that seems like most people can relate to the fact that they're breathing and that that's their way of maybe, but that point is really nice. It's how our breath is how we're communicating with the outer world and our inner world, and the importance of that, and kind of understanding that, maybe, we all have had an experience of when our energy we're feeling like really anxious or something, or when it's very calm, and how our breath changes. And so in a way I think it's very profound, of course, on one level, and on another level it is something maybe practical that someone just reading this or coming into it could work with, or think about, contemplate.
Yeah.
And even when somebody's upset, sorry Ross, and they say, oh, breathe deep, calm down, and as you breathe deep, then your mind calms.
Yeah.
Because they're related. That's just the point.
Well, I was wondering about the kind of implications of this for the existence of outside objects, and so maybe it could tie in a little bit with emptiness too. If it's all from the channels, or how much of it is from the channels, winds, and bindu.
Can you clarify what you mean? Is that like what you were experiencing on our perceptions? Is that what you're talking about, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if we think of like this table, how much of this is from each of our own channels, winds, and tigla.
Yeah, Rinpoches in a way say that in the chapter here, where they talk about how in the Buddhist teachings it's really these fundamental, deeper, in a way, habitual patterns of the winds and the channels are the way the channels are aligned and working and how smooth they are, how balanced, and the particular ways they intermesh and have juncture and all of that definitely affects. So we are all human beings and we all share very similar karma, and that's why like our three main channels are, like they say, the most the same, but then there's subtle differences, you know, and then including they talk about how in like the different realms there's even particular colors that are more emphasized, or different abilities, and then obviously different kinds of bodies and things like that are all reflections of these habitual deeper levels of, you know, all coming from the mind and then reflecting out, and then, you know, so our experience of our body and our world is definitely related to how the channels are aligned in the teachings. And then just on that level of just how the whole point of the Buddha bringing these up is as a means of just harmonizing and balancing the body, speech, and mind, even, and that's very too simplistic, but that's what it really comes back to, it seems. And that due to the fact everything is open and able to change and move, then definitely if we work on kind of just bringing things to a natural balance, then so paying attention to that is all part of that, our posture, our breath. I mean, definitely we go on in the later chapters when they talk about meditation and posture and the breath purification and mantra. And again, this is like kind of basis setting, Rinpoche setting all the foundations to understanding the Tibetan Buddhist practice. You know? And I'd say maybe, should we kind of merge into the second point, or as far as
I mean, I want to, maybe could I say something before we go in? Just related to what you said and what else's question is that, like what you said in terms of harmonizing body, speech, and mind, another way to say that is to have a balance between relative truth and absolute truth.
Yeah.
So this is a core essential teaching of the Buddha. Even in like Sutra Mahayana, Heart Sutra, for example, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is none other than emptiness, and emptiness is none other than form. It's always a union of the two truths, so there's always relative and absolute. It doesn't only just end up being emptiness, or only being relative apparent expression either. So in the terms of this more subtle level structure, with Sa and Long, or with channel and wind, this is relative, but it's more subtle than what we're usually dealing with. So in terms of, there's always a relative expression. It's a key teaching of the Buddha. It never ends up just being empty space. So there always is a relative appearance. And there's degrees of subtlety in those relative appearances. There's giant planets, and there's more medium-sized people and objects, and there's more subtle level buzzing of atomic structure, and there's subtler subatomic structure. And this is more saying that when the mind is more balanced, it can also see this very subtle way in which relative phenomena function. And that's specifically channels and wind and essence element. So in one way it's saying that there's always going to be this apparent relative aspect to things. Even if that apparent relative aspect is the mind and its movement, there's always a movement and expressiveness. And then there's a question of how does it move? So there's ways it moves, through channels or junctures, or you can describe these patterns. There's like relative truth is always patterned because of causality. Cause and effect. And so it's just to say, yeah, that I think it's all, this is on the relative side, that's in union with emptiness for sure, but it's a subtle level relative truth that's there and available for anyone to investigate and look into if they so want to. Just like any science, like you have to look into something and investigate it to see this subtler level structure. Like otherwise there's no way we ever know that water's made of H2O, or which is we won't know. So it's saying that this is there, and there is this subtle level relative truth aspect, which is unavoidable. There's whether if it's gross level relative truth, subtle level, in the end doesn't really matter. But it's saying if you're interested in also seeing this subtler level relative truth, and that's helpful for you on a path of enlightenment, then Buddha gave all these teachings about here's this subtle level structure, and here are techniques you can use to be in touch with them and relate, have your mind express its goodness qualities that way too.
And this is a huge topic, good question.
Huge. Yeah.
Like, and as a general, just one additional point. Generally, in these teachings on the channels, the winds, and essence elements, like from, say, Ani Yoga, they say the physical, the Vajra body, you know, those components of the body are like a mirror image of the external world, and the external world is like a mirror image of the internal physical system too, including like the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets and all the alignment. So as within, so without kind of thing. So the more you purify your own perceptions and your own karmic vision, so that it travels through the channels and the wind and the winds in an unhindered, unimpeded way of wisdom, instead of just normal, ordinary, diluted karmic habit patterns through the channels, then the external appearance of phenomena actually changes from that individual's perspective. So even though they can recognize a table as a table, but the wisdom element of that refined, pure perception of like the Vajrayana, the subtle level of pure relative truth, starts to become more and more apparent. So it's like, by working with one's own mind and the physical system and the physical body, from the individual's perspective, the external phenomenal world actually seems like it's being purified. It's innately pure according to the Vajrayana. It's already pure. But from our perspective, we don't see it that way. So this huge topic, what is it? It's amazingly profound. And the Ani Yoga scriptures too are renowned as like the most fullest expression of all the sadhana and all the tantric teachings. They say some of the Ani Yoga practices is the Vajrayana, the most refined pinnacle of all the Vajrayana ritual, and you know, practice-wise, is found in Ani Yoga. So it's really profound and deep.
Well, the second point.
That's the short answer.
I think I'll do a little summary thing real quick and then do the second point. So Rinpoches say, and this is picking up paragraph 7, that by balancing the channels, we balance the wind energy, or our breath, and that since everything relies on the wind energy to happen, including the mind, and this will balance the mind and also our perceptions. Then they compare, like this second topic, the body to the earth, the channels to roads, the wind to a horse, and the mind to a rider. And I think Ross is going to pick up that quote here in a minute. Then Rinpoches go on to say the purpose of meditation is to bring everything into a natural balance, and therefore it's important to know how channels affect the body and how wind affects the mind. So every moment of consciousness rides the wind energy. Our wind energy affects how we experience time as well. And there are two types of wind. There's karmic wind and then wisdom wind. Now karmic wind is based on negative emotions and obscurations, and wisdom wind is free from ignorance, so free from negative emotions and obscurations. And while most of the breathing and breaths we experience are based on these negative habitual patterns, or karmic winds, there are like regular wisdom winds that also happen in our system, and that they can be calculated in a specific way. But more, if we get in touch to that wind system in ourselves, it becomes easier to recognize when that wisdom wind happens as a natural process in our body, and that by recognizing that more easily, then we can extend that recognition and have that wisdom wind energy last for longer and longer periods of time. And so that'll keep our winds more balanced, our channels more balanced, our body more balanced. In Dzogchen, they talk about these 4 levels of straightness related to this, and we've talked about this a little. Keeping the body straight makes keeping the channels straight, which keeps the winds balanced or straight, which makes the mind, or dualistic mind, straight, which reveals the wisdom, innate primordial wisdom. And then they kind of conclude the chapter by saying that samsara is not straight at all, that it is always circling back on itself, and so this is known as the wheel of life, this constant korwa, or succession of wandering, and that based on our own ignorance and attachment, which leads to anger, we continually cycle and circle within this unbalanced system. And so one way of rebalancing our system is to be in touch with these channels and winds and essence elements, and our mind, and that actually will straighten or balance our own experience, and then we'll become free of this cycling of suffering and become enlightened and reveal these goodness qualities we have. So that's the whole chapter. Then Ross, if you do that, topic 2.
Okay.
Sorry.
In the Vajrayana teachings, there is a well-known example for the relationship between the body, the channels, the wind, and the mind. The body is like the ground or the earth. The channels are like the roads. The wind is like a horse, and the mind or consciousness is like a person who is riding the horse. If the horse is wild, the person is carried in all directions, wherever the horse ends up going. Similarly, if the wind is unbalanced, the consciousness is carried by the wind through all the channels of the body. But if the wind element is tamed, then the mind that rides on the wind is tamed as well. Page 52, third full paragraph.
It's like just a classic metaphor that if we can remember that, those points, body, channels, wind, mind, how they relate, it really lines up the teachings so beautifully, especially these more subtle level teachings. I mean,
And practically, seems like it has important implications for like formal meditation versus like post-meditation. Because sometimes you hear people, like even generally for beginners, when they say, oh, I practice while I'm doing whatever, I meditate while I'm doing this and that. Well, this is just a reminder too that like to keep the body still can be really helpful, you know? To like sit, be quiet, let the winds calm down, let the speech calm down, let the mind calm down, engage in the practice from that place, and then that will carry it. And then you can use that momentum to carry out through your daily activities. But just how it's an important point to use that as a support for you as you engage in different other activities. You know?
And those and the way it relates to it, even the levels of just the conditions of setting up good conditions for things to just be healthy and more natural and simple and in balance more. So the way posture relates to that, whether you're meditating or not, what food you eat or the conditions you put in, just how any way of setting up good conditions for things to flow naturally.
I was just thinking about this metaphor they're using about the ground, the roads, the wind, the horse, and the mind. I was just, because they keep also talking about how important it is to have the straight posture, you know, and then having straight posture means that our channels are straight, and then so the channels are the roads. So if, in a way, I was just thinking, even if like our mind may have a tendency to be wild, by straightening the road, at least it kind of like it starts to direct it from there, and then we can work with our breath. Yeah. So at least it's not like this way and that way, you know. So just like how important posture really is. So I also was just thinking that in terms of what you'd asked earlier, Lodro, about for beginners, like just really the importance of posture and working with that, and then the breath. I mean, it's just, those are simple, very profound ways that we can really begin to tame that wild horse rider.
It's nice too, because I definitely agree with you, Andrew. It does give a great level of importance to having that formalized meditation where you're maintaining a good posture, and at the same time it also as you're saying, it gives that reminder that that mindfulness of how we use our body in our day-to-day life is it's also providing that nice maybe not foundation, but providing a nice space for the practice to carry off the cushion as well, so good on the cushion, and carrying it forward as well.
Is there time for a question?
Yeah, go for it.
I was just wondering, on page 53, the top of 53, they talk about how the wind and time, and I just was wondering if anyone had any thoughts about that. It was a little bit confusing for me, thinking about like the watch that you wear is like a duplicate of your pulse. And
I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye. I'm late.
anything else to say though? I get what you mean, but like, just,
I think at least or if I'm not mistaken, because we were also talking before about, taking that deep, calm breath. It seems like it relates to it on that level too, where when you have, the healthy winds, they're moving at that pulse-like, quality, but, if you're rather agitated, your pulse skyrockets too, so it's those like indicators, it seems. But I don't know, what's your take?
Well, wind is movement. As far as the pulse, wind is movement. They said anything in the whole universe that's moving is wind. Is the wind element, that aspect of the five elements of the wind, the earth.
Yeah.
So it's like, anytime you move, the wind is what makes that possible in the channels. Otherwise, they say without wind, it just wouldn't be possible to even have that.
so would you make the jump then to say that like if the winds are wild, that our sense of time would be rapid or fast? Or and vice versa, like when the winds are calm, that our sense of time is more expanded and slow?
Spacious, regulated, rhythmic, matching up with
Balanced,
other things,
maybe.
balanced.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because even day to day, if you have a very go kind of day, you get to the end and you're usually like, what the heck just happened and when did it happen? Kind of a thing. Whereas if you're going to have a nice, calm, and peaceful day, it's it doesn't feel as harried. But that's not particularly practice speaking as much as going crazy in the kitchen speaking. From experience.
I think this is as esoteric as this might be, this topic. We really experience this all the time in our lives.
Because we
Like
have
it's such a really clear example is such a rushed culture. Like this time is so busy. There's a tension, there's a pressure to achieve all the time. Like there's just this rapid pulse. I think people feel that. I mean, I definitely feel that, and this, just to talk about it in this context, that's wind.
Yeah.
It's a tightened channels. It's things aren't as open and confident. They're just more twisted and tight and narrow, and that is all related to inner level structure and how our breathing is so shallow, and how we have to always just caffeinate and get supercharged and overcome in impractical ways that are somehow not. It's almost as if we're beyond our bodies and we can just overcome physical limitations if we just push it hard enough. And these teachings are very clearly saying it's not really that way. We can do a lot if we become more sensitive to these patterns in ourselves, and that it's because we're already sensitive to these patterns in ourselves. Why do we have coffee right when we get up? Because we're sensitive to that pattern. Maybe we're a little unconscious about it, so we just... But at the same time, this point is that, while Rinpoches really talk about this subtle level structure, and this isn't just Rinpoches, but the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche too, they also said because we all have this primordial nature, we don't have to use these subtle level practices of this Trulkor and Salong and all these subtle level practices, that because we have that pure nature already, we can directly connect to that nature. So that's called Drolang, right? Liberative practice, directly connecting to the nature. But as a path, to do that, it's for a lot of people, it's more practical to also incorporate our energy, our subtle level structure, because it's hard to just directly connect to something regardless of the conditions, It's really high level, hard to do. So there's this whole system of connecting to this subtle level structure, body, and also gross level body, and then using those as a way to ground and create proper causes and conditions for the mind to become more balanced and have that nature be revealed. So while it says it doesn't have to be done, it is there, the subtle level energy, that we're all aware of this subtle level things, this pulsing or just subtler level. And it can be utilized in ways that are helpful to bring balance to our mind and make us more helpful for ourselves and others too.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Swasti Risayantu Chosun Sasun Jigdu Bemaju Nyingme Sodeb Tuje Tujinji Kinchin Baudin Shira Trubeku Vajo Tindro Zezan Dajin Cho Om Swasti Choko Nanda Numku Chenrezi Choko Bajun Yabyun Dujedu Bela Bazan Jacho Yansiga Tendor Bende Dundu Nujasho Kari Rawe Korwe Shinkansu Dendan Dewa Malu Juweni Chenrezi Wan Tenzin Jatsuri Shabe Kaje Padu Tenjoji Om Swasti Sewang Rizin Bebe Jinlaji Dunyin Drupe Laksan Nordenla Shedu Kolo Sunji Bajote Sanchen Atan Chole Namja Sho. By this merit may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. The precious bodhicitta, and those without it may it be generated, and those who have it may it never diminish, but always continue increasing.